now. Thank you for listening to Legends of Tabletop. You are listening to Leah Bond and Anya Martin. Would you care to introduce yourself, Anya?
You're listening to Legends of Tabletop, and I'm Anya Martin. I'm a writer. I guess I write weird stuff. I've done, recently I've had a play published called Passage from the Dreamtime from Dunham's Manor Press. I have a story in Looming Low, the new anthology from Dim Shores, and I will have a story upcoming in Ross Lockhart's Tales from the Talking Board as well, which is coming from Word Horde this fall. And I guess I published a bunch of short stories and novellas.
Oh, absolutely. You're a very prolific short story writer that I've seen. And I really, I recently got the extreme privilege to read your most recent short story. Oh gosh. Now I'm totally drawing a blank on the title here.
Reading Poesia Trivittata?
Yes, Poesia Trivittata, and I really did appreciate that. And I can see some parallels between the story and what you are currently dealing with, which I find a little bit amusing, and then also it is very, very frightening to myself because you touch on one of my phobias, which is insects, and I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to give too much of it away.
Oh, the box elder bugs. Well, actually, I'm not dealing with the box elder bugs anymore. They're gone. They arrived in January, and they were around for like a month or two, and then they disappeared as mysteriously as they appeared. But it is true that they showed up in January, which is not normal. They usually, if you, at least online research tells me that if one has a Poesia Trivittata infestation, it's usually in warmer weather. But it is true that my house was being painted, and they did not like the paint. So after it was painted, they disappeared. It was interesting because they really, as in the story, they really don't do anything. They're just sort of nuisance bugs. Yes, they come in the house, but they don't sting you. They're not like stink bugs that also come in the house. They don't do anything. They just sort of wander around, or occasionally they fly, and they're just there. And so, you know, I started sort of chronicling what they did, and it became a short story that perhaps has a reflection on current events.
Yes. With you having to, not necessarily having to, but at that point in home ownership where the home is moving ownership from you to someone else, that can be a very stressful situation. Let's see. In Ouija Tell Me Do, I really am looking forward to the release of this book, and your short story that you have there. Can you tell me, did you take any inspiration from where you're currently at in Atlanta for this at all?
Well, actually, the anthology is Tales from the Talking Board, and my story title is Ouija Tell Me Do, which is the name of a song from 1920. And no, the story has nothing to do with Atlanta at all. In fact, I set it in Indianapolis in particular because I didn't want to do a story in 1920 in Atlanta, because I thought that at that length, I feel like any story in 1920 in Atlanta would have needed to acknowledge racial issues, and I didn't feel I could do that in that story length. And also with this story, that doesn't mean that that Indiana was certainly immune from that at all. But I said it, my family has roots in Indianapolis, and I wanted sort of a mid-sized American city where the vaudeville circuit would go. because the song, you can hear it online, by the way, if you search it on YouTube. And it was like a #1 hit back in 1920.
Oh, wow.
Which was apparently one of the biggest years for Ouija. Ouija was insanely popular in 1920. There were films about Ouija, silent movies. Everybody was doing that. And the top thing about your, your romance, which we don't always think of today as being perhaps the question you think about contacting the spirits, but. So I really, I mean, that's another one of those stories where I said to Ross, hey, is anybody writing about this song? And he said, no. And I didn't have really a clear story idea at all. So I looked up the history of the song, tried to find out if there was anything weird. No, it was just a song basically to cash in on the popularity of Ouija, and sung by some of the most popular vaudeville performers of the day. And one of them makes a cameo, the great Marie Cahill. Shows up in the story herself. So it's set in that vaudeville circuit, but centered around a gal who is, my main character's name is Orla, who has been playing with the board and is kind of in an unhappy marriage, but has a talent for singing and dancing and aspirations to be in vaudeville. So I tried to extend it from there. And also, I thought a lot about what does it mean. I didn't want to write a standard ghost story or a summoning demon story. So I tried to think a lot about what makes the actual Ouija board move. And I did some test runs with my friend Danon. And we, and it does move. It moves. You put it on, and it's like, we swear, we're about the most scientific people, and it moves. And so I thought about what they call the idiometer or phenomenon, which is a psychological phenomenon where a subject makes motions unconsciously, according to Wikipedia. But basically, that's the sort of is the scientific theory behind the Ouija board, which in 1920 they wouldn't even know about that. That term wouldn't exist. So I tried to also bring that a bit into the story as Orla loses control or kind of her hands. Try to sort of bring that in, that aspect, and thought about stories like the Lorla by Guy de Maupassant and the Hands of Orlac, which are famous stories of people losing controls of their hands. Maybe I don't know that tells you exactly what the story is about, but hopefully I didn't give away too much. But those were the things in my mind when writing the story, which I thought of terribly close to when I was told I had to get the story in, or I was going to lose my opportunity to be in the anthology. And somehow that's when ideas happen.
Yes. But oh dear, I'm echoing. I'll figure that out.
I don't hear you echoing.
Oh, okay.
Not happening on my end.
Oh, okay, great. What was I going to say? Yeah, that resonated with me as well. Her hands having difficulty, because I do also have a tremor in one of my hands, and I experience a small loss of control in one of my hands. So that resonates with me as well through that story. Oh, what was I going to say? Now, I remember you speaking a little about your upcoming panel that you've got coming up for the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival in Portland. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Gwen Callahan asked me to do a presentation on Margaret Brundage, who was the top cover artist for Weird Tales in the 1930s, and really is probably the artist of most of the covers that are most iconic that were published in Weird Tales in the 30s. And so I'm going to put together probably some kind of a slideshow and talk a little bit about her history. Vanguard Press put out a book a few years ago about her I managed to uncover, she was very left-wing, uncover some personal information about her. Often that it's the people that are the women that were involved with Weird Tales sometimes have unusual stories behind them. There's sort of an unexpected element. How did this woman who was somewhat left-wing and an artist become the top cover artist for Weird Tales? So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and maybe I'll use that as a springboard to talk about some of the other women writers who were in Weird Tales. Weird Tales among the pulps, it had perhaps a surprising number of women, and up to, I think the estimate is like over 130 women actually appeared in Weird Tales.
Oh my gosh.
Which is perhaps surprising. Obviously, I think that's still a small proportion across the entire sweep of writers, but I think it's higher than, say, with Astounding or Unknown or many of the other science fiction magazines of the time.
Yeah, definitely. That's very promising to hear, and I would love to hear more about that. Now, do you know if the panel itself will be broadcast over YouTube after you present it?
I don't know, but I'll talk to Gwen about it. And I don't know that it'll be I don't know if I got the impression that I'd be doing it on my own, although perhaps I'll end up tag teaming with somebody who's working on it with me, whether it'll be a true panel or more of a presentation. But
okay.
One thing about Margaret Brundage that people may not know is that she didn't paint. She worked with pastels.
Mm-hmm.
And her work, if you've ever seen any of her pieces live, which I did a few years ago in an art exhibition down in Florida with a private collector, they're really powerful. The original, I mean, I'm not sure that all the originals still exist. Many of the covers got trashed over the years, got just thrown away. But her work it's really quite striking when you see it in person, and the fact that it is pastels, which was somewhat unexpected for me.
Okay. Now, I've never gotten the opportunity to see it in person. However, many of the JPEGs available grace my desktop every once in a while. But yes, I certainly was familiar with Margaret Brundage when you had mentioned her name. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, Grass, can you tell me a little bit about Grass? I have not had the opportunity to read this yet.
That's my novella from Dim Shores. That was a limited edition novella for Dim Shores, and it was, I think, limited to 150 copies and sold out like really fast. So
yes,
friends of mine don't have copies of it. You know.
Okay.
People are always asking me, "Will there be another opportunity?" I think there was, Sam managed to find one to donate to the Outer Dark Symposium Indiegogo, and then there was one for sale at the at Necronomicon. So I think he's totally tapped out now. But yeah, it's a novella. Sam asked me about writing something for Dim Shores, and that's what I came up with. It's set in South Georgia, in the area of the Okefenokee. It's actually not necessarily in the Okefenokee Swamp per se, but in that region. And it is, and basically it's, I guess I should say the story behind it. The plane crash in the story is real. My friend, a good friend of mine, Terry Carter, I'm going to say her name. Then I can tell her to listen. Told me she had this story that this woman that she met told her, a real life story, and that she thought that perhaps I could use it in my fiction. And she told me this whole story about this plane crash. This woman's ex-husband and his new wife died in a small plane crash in a swamp, and their bodies were found with grass basically growing through them because of the impact. And I guess it depends on the kind of grass, but if your body falls from a high altitude and it falls on a certain kind of grass, which is prone to that area, certain kind of marsh grass, it will go through. So it looks like grass is growing through the bodies. And there are other details of the story and of the beginning of the story that were true to this woman's anecdote. The ex-husband was an alcoholic. He did say some of the things to her that I say in the story. Some of these aspects. And then she did become responsible for his funeral because I guess he didn't have other family members, which was kind of creepy in that they had a very bad divorce.
Yes.
So on one hand, there were these aspects, and then after this happened, she thought she saw him in a mirror, and Terry said to me, perhaps there's a ghost story in here, and I said, no, I don't think it's a ghost story. I think it's a weird story. So something perhaps follows our heroine back to Atlanta after she goes to see the body. After she IDs the body, and things happen. And things got very weird. And I probably shouldn't say any more because I don't like to spoiler my own story.
Also, Womanthlogy, heroic. Tell us about that.
That was a comics anthology that came out in 2012. And basically, it was the idea was that it was going to be a all women comics anthology. The call went out within 24 hours. There was tons of overwhelming interest in the project, and they did a Kickstarter and raised the money to pay for it. Way over raised the money, like raised over $100,000 to put this project together.
Wow.
It ended up with 140 women, and I think I got into it because Steve Niles told me about it, and I asked right at the very beginning, and luckily I got paired with a fabulous artist, Mado Peña, and I wrote a story we called A Stuffed Bunny in Dollland, which is based on my own stuffed animals, my own oldest stuffed animals, and was a concept I already had, a much longer concept, and he really whittled it down, the essence of it, to 4 pages. And Mado did this incredible artwork to go with it. I think it's still available online. You can still get copies. It's an incredible book, especially if you have a young woman in your life who is an aspiring comics artist. The idea was that it would be inspirational and encouraging to young girls and young women who were interested in writing or illustrating comics. And it even has how-to stuff at the end and interviews with top female comics creators. This was the brainchild of Renee Veliz, who has done a number of projects, most recently The Last Unicorn graphic novel. And this was just her idea. It's sort of in the same way that Sylvia Moreno Garcia came up with the idea of doing the project on Lovecraft's, on women writers writing about the women in Lovecraft's fiction, something that just came out of an internet discussion. And then she put a call out, and the people who ended up in it were often, were the people that were the women who moved fast on this. And it was really a very inspirational, like that book, She Walks in Shadows. It was a really inspirational project. And afterwards we went to, for that whole summer, we were going to comic shows and presenting it. I went to 3. I went to Heroes Con in North Carolina. I went to San Diego Comic-Con, and Mado actually got a scholarship from DeviantArt and was able to meet me there. So we hung out together and got to meet each other. And she's based in Barcelona.
Yeah.
And then I did New York Comic Con. So it was kind of like a very rock and roll tour during the summer. I'm not sure that it changed anything in comics. Comics is really a very difficult medium for women. But I think it did open some doors and give some encouragement, and was still just a hell of a great project.
Yeah, speaking of comic, you're also the co-author of Still Life with Peckerwood.
That's a story I did a long time ago. That's not comics. That was
okay.
Inspired by, that was a
I see
that
that
Nancy Collins did, edited back in like the 90s, about which was inspired. Gay and Wilson did illustrations for a haunted mansion, and we were assigned a room, and the story is actually, it's funny you mention that story, because it was inspired by the poet Thomas Hulley Shivers, who accused Poe of plagiarism. So and I just did an article. I just wrote an article about Thomas Hulley Shivers for the Outer Dark Symposium program book, and for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution magazine in town at Living in Town, which was, I did a feature on cemeteries and talked about Thomas Hulley Shivers' grave and that came out just last Sunday. So it's funny you mentioned that. But Thomas Hulley Shivers was a poet. He's often known as the lost poet of Georgia. His poetry was very similar to Poe's. And I think there is some reasonable suggestion that Poe took some of his ideas. Whether he's not at all the level of poet as Poe, but it's like Poe improved probably on his on its rhythm and his language. But it's a very interesting story, that, and I probably will take that essay that was in the Outer Dark Symposium and put it online at some point.
Okay.
In our program book for that. But yeah, that particular short story was based on Thomas Hulley Shivers and the concept that he was trapped inside a painting at this house, and going off of a Decatur, Georgia legend that he requested at the end of when he died that he be buried under his front stoop. So his beautiful younger wife would not remarry, basically to haunt her, and so forth. So and that isn't precisely true, and she wasn't actually all that much younger than him, but he did request that he be buried really near the front door, so she'd have to visit him every day. And he's been moved to Decatur Cemetery now, which is why I ended up writing about it for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. But yeah, that's the story behind that story. People don't bring it up all that much, but it's you can still find that anthology online. People bring it to me to sign every once in a while.
Now, speaking of strange things, I can't help but notice the toe.
Oh yeah,
Dinotox. Oh man, and the feet anthology.
That's the grossest story I've ever written.
I have yet to read it. Naughty me. But
it's only 4 pages. It's like also the shortest thing practically I've ever written.
But yeah, I couldn't help but notice the photo that you took of I'm guessing it's yourself in some pointed toe shoes.
I don't know which picture are you talking about. Something on?
It's something on Facebook where you're wearing, I think it's you, wearing pointed toe high heel shoes.
I might be, but there's no shoes in that story.
Oh.
There's no shoes in that story. It's nothing to do with shoes.
No. Oh.
It's literally what it says it's about.
Okay. All right.
And it's pretty gross.
All right. Oh goodness. Where was I going to go next? Oh, Dark Destinies 3, The Devil's March.
Oh, that you're really going back in the past. You didn't warn me about that.
Oh yes.
That's like really old stuff that I would consider those stories are really like a different generation compared to what I write now. That story was it was really a theme anthology. Those were things for White Wolf, and they were theme anthologies that came out the time. That story idea is my story idea, but the idea was like, what's the craziest idea we can come up with? Oh, General Sherman burned Atlanta to get rid of vampires. And then I researched Oakland Cemetery and discovered that there was a portion time, or there's at least a story that the Union soldiers dug up Confederate graves. So is that why they dug up Confederate graves? Anyway, I wrote it. It was planned as epistolary in the same concept as Dracula. This theme of the anthology was Children of Dracula. So you were supposed to tie it in with the White Wolf game, but I never really, you didn't have to really. So the story really had nothing to do with Vampire the Masquerade. But the idea was that you were supposed to bring in Dracula, and the idea was that Dracula was going to come to the American South before he was going to go to England, and so the reason he ended up going to England partly is because that fell through and what happened. And I put General Sherman into the Van Helsing role. And there are some other characters, and P.T. Barnum figures in it. It's an interesting concept. I have thought about going back to that. I've thought of a framing device and so forth, but I'm just not really interested at this moment in writing about the Civil War. I think it's certainly in any way that idolizes the South, or in any way. And so in that, I don't think that story did. That story, all the heroes were Union, but it didn't really come face to face with slavery and stuff. It was, if I was going to write something now, I would be more concerned with slavery and the consequences of the Civil War. But it was a fun story to write. It was an interesting story to write, and maybe one day at the framing, I do have a framing device if I wanted to return to that concept. But anyway, it was, I don't know, as I said, these old stories are really not they're not really very reflective of what I write now. Maybe Still Life Peckerwood is still has some relevance to today. But
okay, let's jump forward a little bit closer to present day. Old Sahov and Casilda's Song, released by Chaosium, edited by Joe Pulver. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Well, that story is the idea was, Joe Pulver approached me to write a story inspired by or riffing off of the King in Yellow stories, Robert W. Chambers, and I thought about writing something very different, and in fact, something that would riff off of my play Passage to the Dreamtime originally, but that didn't really pan out. So as I was thinking of ideas, I began to think a lot about Old Yeller. and really that story comes very out. Old Zatov is basically Old Yeller, except for in Hebrew. Yeah. And there was this dog in my neighborhood that used to attack my dog. Oh. I mean, literally, it just ran from like miles away. And this crazy dog. He was an Israeli dog. He really should never have been brought to the United States. He was the woman who owned him told me that he's that he followed her home in Jerusalem when he was maybe like 8 months, less than a year old. And so in the story, the dog does do that. The dog follows a woman home, follows Casilda. And I began to think about this dog and the story. This dog was somewhat crazy, but it loved its people. But it was somewhat crazy. It was definitely somewhat off, and it would she told me that it had like literally broken the glass on the back of the house
Mm.
That story comes from. My dog only makes a quick cameo in the story. It's really more about that dog, and maybe I get some empathy for this dog that was like attacked by dog in there. And also I guess Jerusalem is also known as the city of gold, so I thought about Carcosa and and the King in Yellow, and saw some parallels with Jerusalem. Some people don't like that story because they say it's too far away from the actual mythos of the King in Yellow. But what I was trying to do was do something consistent in tone and theme, but thematic. But I was not trying. I really don't have much interest in writing stories in other people's universes, which is why I'm not really writing, Craftian stories per se. Mm-hmm. The stories that I've written that are anything near that are just very tangentially so.
Okay, well, I'm going to take a moment right now to interject very briefly to bring us a word from our sponsors. Small Batch Craft Coffee Roaster, Birds of a Feather Coffee Company. And they do roast unique craft coffees in small batches so that it's always fresh. Their signature blends showcase the amazing breadth and depth of flavors that coffee has to offer. The Night Owl blend, for example, is a rich, deep cup of coffee with notes of smooth caramel, decadent cocoa, and bittersweet molasses with just a touch of acidity to clean the palate so you're ready for the next sip. Check out all of the Birds coffees and order now at www.birdscoffeecompany.com. There's a brew for every birdie at birdscoffeecompany.com. And don't forget to use the codes LEGENDS10 for a 10% discount. LEGENDS10 for a 10% discount. And thank you so much, Anya. And with the Old Sahab, we're gonna transfer over to the Passage to the Dreamtime from Dunham's Manor Playhouse. Would you care to share a little bit about that?
Sure. That is actually a one-act play, and I wrote most of it in college. It was workshopped at a playwriting class. And when I say that, it was workshop with actors, and so we really worked on the script to make sure that you could actually read it, perform it to some extent. So it was a really great opportunity. When I was young, when I was a kid, I wrote plays all the time. That's all I ever did is I wrote plays. I was always writing a play, and some of them were performed. But this is actually the last play I've written. I've not really written plays as an adult, other than this play. And I, at the time, we were for part of the class, we were asked to assign to part of the assignment was to submit it to a contest. So I submitted it to the Great American Play Contest, which everybody does, and of course I didn't win. And then it went in a drawer, but it's so not the Great American Play, although it's timely perhaps today in a way that I didn't anticipate when Jordan and I first talked about publishing it. I thought it was funny because when I was talking to Joe Pulver about, I actually worked with Joe on another project which related to the King in Yellow, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought, gosh, this play, it's not a King in Yellow. The Chaosium is not in there. None of that. Chaosium, excuse me, Carcosa.
Yes.
I slipped out. That was like a bad slip.
Oh, it's okay.
Kara, but there were elements in there, and there was a thing with yellow paint, which I won't say anything more about. But the idea, the concept, what came out of a class, a senior level seminar I took on at Smith College on Nazism. It was an anthropology seminar, but I did a paper on Nazism as a millenarian movement, as a sort of millenarian movement looks towards the golden age. And these kinds of movements take place in times when society is somewhat destabilized and people are looking back to the past with this idea of sort of an ideal society, and sometimes with elements of mysticism. And it's set in Nuremberg prison right after the war, with a Nazi officer and an American woman comes back to, who was a jazz singer in Paris during the occupation and had an affair with him, comes back to see him and sort of confront what he did, because her whole concept of him, she never observed him doing the crimes that he did, war crimes. And she thought of him as an artist. And he's in prison doing this artwork, which has been recreated amazingly by Kim Bo-young. Kim, the art in, I mean, really, I would tell you to buy the book for Kim's artwork.
Where can we buy it?
Well, you can buy it from Dunham's Manor Press online. You can just go on. You can just Google Dunham's Manor Press, and you should be able to find it really easily. It's not expensive. I think it's still on sale for $5 plus postage and handling, which for a quality chapbook like this, it's like a crazy cheap price. It's limited to 150 copies. Kim's artwork is she did both the cover, the back cover, and all the interior artwork, and it's again not directly illustrated to what's going on in the play. It's meant to reflect the art that Franz is producing in prison as he goes mad, and it's called Passage to the Dreamtime because he something happens that is inspired by the Australian Aboriginal concept of the Dreamtime. Is a thematic element in this, but it is through the lens of a white man who has read about. It's not meant to be from the perspective of, I mean, whereas we're challenging your comfort level with a lot of different things, which might be appropriate in the America of today, where we are having a dialogue about fascism and whether and how you should feel about people who do terrible things or wish terrible things among other people.
Very timely indeed. But yeah, moving on to, again, we can find that at Dunham's Manor Playhouse. Google that, and I believe it's on sale. And let's look for Boisea Trivittata, Looming Low. Again, that's through Dim Shores. And let's see, Ouija, Tell Me Do. Tales from a Talking Board, edited by Ross Lockhart, and that's coming out in the next couple of weeks, I believe, in October. Any specific date in October that it'll be available to ship?
I think it's the end of October when it's actually shipping, but you'll have to ask Ross, but I have a feeling there may be some copies at H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival.
Excellent.
I'll be in Petaluma at the opening event for that, the opening readings at the end of the last Friday in October too.
Excellent. And Blackstone Roses and Granite Gazanias in Mantid Magazine. Can we talk a little bit about that one?
Sure. That's another one of my older stories that it's one of those stories that it's kind of like an orphan story that I submitted a lot of places, but people don't seem to really get. And Farrah Smith, I am very grateful to her for understanding the story. There are others, I've had much encouragement from like Selena Chambers and Damien Angelica Walters encouraged me not to give up on that story, to keep sending it out. But it's kind of like, I don't want to call it postmodern. That's kind of like a dirty word, but it's a story about a girl that, a young woman that kind of idolizes, a lot of romanticized concepts of like, well, gargoyles and evil, in a way that is perhaps not very healthy. And and then sort of gets her wish coming true. And it's also a concept, you know, it's like perhaps there's a little bit of commentary on romance, and especially sort of how we view that when we're a lot younger, when we're too young to know better. And maybe it isn't really all that great to fall for that dark, handsome kind of brooding guy, because he might really not be a very nice person. But in this case, it's a gargoyle that comes alive off of Notre Dame Cathedral, and there's like an enchantment and also some other historical commentary. And it is absolutely not a deal with the devil story, even though it was once suggested to me that it was. That was a surprise to me, even though there is a deal possibly.
Well, I believe this is still available for purchase through Amazon. Manted Magazine, I believe that is the summer 2016 issue. Still available through Amazon. And let's see, the Prince of
Lies.
Yeah.
Lyghes.
Yes.
That was in Cthulhu Fhtagn, edited by Ross Lockhart. It was my first. That was my second sale to Ross for Word Horde. I've been in 4 Word Horde anthologies now. So that was a story that I came up with the idea while listening to Peter Straub read at a World Horror Convention. And somewhere out of that, I think he and Molly Tanzer were reading stories that were inspired by Lovecraft. There's not a lot of Lovecraft in that story, but it was like, wow, I've never written a story that actually has a Lovecraftian element, and that is the story that does. Although I did write the story for Resonator later.
Resonator Superstar.
Yeah, that's a different story, but this one it's a gal, you know, trapped in a terrible relationship, and with a guy who's getting stuff in the mail.
Ooh.
Except for it isn't necessarily what he says it is. And she finds out, you know, like as with Bluebeard's wives, she goes and peeks where she's not supposed to, and discovers something terrible.
Yes. The temptation sometimes is just too great. Sensoria, Giallo Fantastique, another Word Horde anthology from Ross. Would you care to share anything about that?
Yeah, it's actually pronounced Sensoria, which is hard to. No, don't worry about it. Sensoria is actually a song by Cabaret Voltaire too, although I didn't actually name it after that song necessarily. I was trying to rip off of Suspiria. Giallo Fantastique. This is my first sale to Ross, and Giallo Fantastique was a Giallo-themed anthology. And this story is again, it's like a rehab science fiction story that I wrote back in a first draft in like 89, 90. And it was published in the first draft is very different from this. It had a technological element, which is now replaced by a hallucinogenic insect. And, apparently that's what was needed for this story to make it work. But the concept is that it's set in the world of rock music and Giallo theatrics, and there are some real life settings in there that I experienced in one form or another. But you basically, when you listen to a song and you take this and you put this insect in your mouth and you bite down, things happen. And I don't want to say too much about the story, except it was a lot of fun to write, and it was fun to take this old story and really try to rehab it and make it into something just different enough that it would sell. So I'm really happy actually it didn't sell, although when it was first published, I am very grateful to Lawrence Watts Evans for encouraging me to write, and he really was a real champion of the original version of the story. which appeared in Science Fiction Randomly. Go find that up. It's called something else. And go find that issue. It's like an obscure fanzine published in Florida, but a very good fiction, science fiction zine published in the late 80s.
Oh gosh, yeah, because I'm trying to scour this text really quickly, which I don't think that the only thing that I see regarding optimistic science fiction would be The Courage of the Lion Tamer.
What do you mean? The only thing that you see? Well, I was going to say The Courage of the Lion Tamer is free online, and it is an anomaly among my stories. It is an optimistic science fiction story. Yetzi DeVry, who was the editor of Inner Zone, threw down a gauntlet to science fiction writers to write an optimistic science fiction story because he felt that everything he was reading was so dystopian. That became the submissions became the anthology Shine. My story didn't make it into Shine, but he did this online magazine that went for a period of time afterwards, and I was paid actually really, really well for that story, which so it was a fun story to write, and it's about lions in Africa and maybe a way that it's about animal conservation, and it has a kind of it's got a sadness to it, but also an optimistic suggestion for what might happen to save animal species from becoming extinct.
Very timely.
Yeah. So I mean, I encourage people find it every once in a while. It always excites me when somebody reads it and tells me about that story. And that story actually, excuse me, is the one that when Joe Pulver asked me, because I hadn't been published that much for Casilda, a story sample before inviting me to Casilda Song, that's what I sent to him, and so it got me the invitation to Casilda Song as well.
That's awesome. Now, is there anything else that you have coming up in the pipeline that we should be aware of?
Well, I have a Lady Box zine flash fiction piece, which is I did something they're doing every year. They do a fun some kind of like fun anthology and this year I made it in. I haven't submitted before, but there were three. It's called Zine Trilogy, and I made it into the bands that your exes ruined for you. And all I'll tell you is my flash fiction piece is called Surrender. So you'll either know immediately who the band is or you won't. But if you know the song, that should be a pretty big clue. So that's coming out. I have other things that I'm working on right now, but I hope to have an announcement about a collection very soon. Short stories, but it's still too soon for me to announce anything. I mean, other than that, I'm an associate producer on the Outer Dark podcast that Scott Nicolay hosts. So I write all the notes for that, and I am notes for that, and I do the beta listens, and I help coordinate a lot of stuff to do with that. And we will be doing an Outer Dark symposium again next spring, probably in San Jose, California. We'll be making an announcement soon.
Exciting.
Yeah, so I think I do my blog, atlretro.com, although Melanie Crew writes most of it now, but it still exists. And if you come to Atlanta, we'll tell you things to do that nobody else will tell you, fun stuff. And I'm also working on some other nonfiction projects and some short stories. I don't like to jinx things ahead of time. There'll be some, but let's just say that I'm working on some original pieces that for my collection as well.
without further ado, then I will shift into the what we call here at Legends the Final Five. Let's see, video game or tabletop games? Which one do you prefer?
Oh God, I don't even have time to play games. But I guess I probably, if I had time to play games, I probably am more likely to play tabletop. But I'm going to be like very old school. I'm probably going to be playing some board game that nobody plays anymore but me.
Which one was your favorite?
Oh God, which one's my favorite? You really got me on the spot. I'll tell you one that's just super cool though. That from when I was a kid, and it's Uncle Wiggily. It has the best artwork. The 1920 Uncle Wiggily and the early 60s Uncle Wiggily. It has monsters. I mean, it has really weird creatures. It has these cards. You know, you go a certain number of steps, and then you draw cards, and it's just like the weirdest game. So I highly recommend Uncle Wiggily, and I will gladly play it with anyone anytime.
Okay, Uncle Wiggily then. For games, Star Wars, Star Trek, or for those that like neither of the previous selections, Dune. Which one?
Oh God, are you actually doing the movie?
The book series.
The book series. Oh, don't put me on the spot on this. I mean, I don't really like. I mean, Star Wars changed my life when I was much younger. It literally did change my life. So I owe something to Star Wars that I can't even say. But that was Star Wars, the original movie, not that they now want to call A New Hope. Not
podcasting.
Yeah, that's so probably. But Dune also was an incredible read. I read Dune probably right after I saw Star Wars, and I like Star Trek. I really can't. I don't know that those are quite. Those aren't my favorite things, but they've all had important places in my evolution.
Okay. Which one is your favorite then? What should we take a look at?
What should you take? What is my favorite?
Sure.
Oh God, I don't even.
Science fiction, yeah.
Are we talking about books, films, or? You gotta
do film. Let's narrow it down to
science fiction film.
Yeah,
not horror or something else, but actual science fiction film. Oh, this becomes difficult. I Blade Runner probably, maybe.
Okay.
If I had to like name one film that's a desert island film that's science fiction, it would be Blade Runner.
Okay. If you could have one superpower, what would it be and why?
It's one superpower. I don't know. It'd be something like probably stamina. To be able to keep going. I'm pretty good at keeping going, but to keep going and not get tired and be able to get everything done that I'd like to get done would probably be the one thing that would be most important to me right now. I want to get done.
Yeah.
Things that interfere with that. So it'd be nice to not have to sleep or something. I like sleep too. I do like sleep.
Marvel or DC?
I would say that I'm probably more Marvel because of the X-Men, and but I'm not really contemporary Marvel. But I really did appreciate the X-Men in its time, though when I was growing up, my dad bought me DC Comics, Tarzan, Joe Kubert Tarzan. So I have to say that for superheroes, definitely Marvel, but I do have a special affection for Joe Kubert's Tarzans. As problematic as Tarzan is, because my dad bought that for me. And his love of Opar was really fantastic with red hair and everything. She was like a real role model for me.
Awesome. Science fiction or fantasy?
Weird fiction.
Okay.
Horror, word fiction or horror.
um,
Yeah. Is that okay?
that is absolutely fine. What job, not to say that you don't have this job already, but what job, if you were offered it, would make you immediately drop everything you're doing to say yes to?
I don't know, writing a fiction writing job that paid well. A fiction writing job that that had like some kind of had a really great advance that would allow me to do to be able to fund the other projects that I'd like to do. Anything that has to do with writing fiction rather than nonfiction.
Okay.
Because I've spent most of my life writing nonfiction, so.
I'm going to dive over into another area. Music question. What album can you listen to all the way through without skipping a single track?
Probably quite a few. Let me think. I mean, right now, lately, I just re-listened one album that I just love that I've always, The Dreaming by Kate Bush. And I just sort of have rediscovered that album lately, but every song is fantastic on that album. I think it's her strongest album in her career.
Okay. Let's see. Let's go meta. What question do you want to be asked? What question do you wish I would have asked you?
Well, there's one story that's special to me that you didn't actually ask me about. That is perhaps the story that's the most special to me of any that I've written, and that's A Girl and Her Dog, which is fairly hard. You'll be able to get it when I have a collection again, but it was in
Ex Noibus #2?
Yeah. That story is a very personal story to me. It took a while to find the right market for it. And in a way, I felt like that's the story that has the example when I talk about how the markets have changed and evolved, because that story stayed essentially the same, but took a long time to find a home. And yet, every time anybody read, I won't say every time, but a lot of people read it. I read it aloud. And I got an incredible reception because that story, because if you've ever lost a dog or cat, an animal dear to you, that story is really about that resonating. And I wrote it after several years after my first dog died.
Oh.
And I had other dogs at that point, but so it's not about. A lot of people know I recently had a dog named Max. It's not about Max, though certainly it resonates with me. And it's not a response to Harlan Ellison's A Boy and Her Dog. I don't know why I'm coughing explicitly either. But it is very much A Girl and Her Dog, because A Girl and Her Dog story is a very different story from A Boy and His Dog. Yes. And I guess all I would say is that story just is a really, if I had to say there's one story that epitomizes my style or has something that's just really special to me, it's that story. And I do look forward to hopefully seeing it back in print again.
Now, is there anywhere that we can currently get this?
I don't know if if there are copies left. If there's copies left of Synoibus too, then you can get it at Dunham's Manor. From Dunham's Manor Press. And there were some copies left recently, but I haven't looked on the website to see if they're still available.
Oh, okay.
It was limited to like 100 copies or some fairly small print run, as Dunham's Manor books generally are. They're very high quality, but if you don't get them quickly, you can miss your opportunity, as you can with a Dim Shores book.
Okay. Now, I did, speaking of Dim Shores, I did miss the opportunity to pick up a copy of Looming Low, and I do regret that. But is there anything else that you would like to add before I wrap up for the evening?
Just thank you for interviewing me and having an interest in my work. You definitely did your homework. coming up with some stuff that is really way back in my history. Maybe somebody will go look for those stories now and then and give me their thoughts about them. As I said, the Courage Lion Tamer is free online. You can go to my website, anyamartin.com, and find the link to that. And that's actually my bibliography on that website at anyamartin.com should be complete. And you can find out how to order links for everything that is available.
Okay, great.
At that in the bibliography section.
And that is anyamartin.com, ANYA, M as in Mary, ART as in Thomas, IN as in Nancy.com. Thank you very, very much for your time, Anya, and I greatly appreciate it. Before I sign off for the evening, thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to speaking with you all again, and have a wonderful evening, Anya.
Thank you, Leah.